It's week 7 of the fantasy season, and before you set your final starting lineups, here are 5 stats that you need to know before kickoff. All right, so far in the season, wide receiver Davante Adams has averaged 9.7 targets and 13.9 fantasy points per game thus far on the season. And here in week 7, he gets a Jaguars defense that has allowed the 3rd most receiving yards per game and has struggled mightily against perimeter wide receivers like Davante Adams. And on top of that, he is currently leading the league amongst all wide receivers in total red zone targets with 13 red zone targets. So point being is that I absolutely love Davante Adams in this week 7 matchup. I know it's a London game. We're supposed to get maybe some bad weather in this game, but ultimately with Puka Nacua set to miss week 7 of the season, Davante Adams feels like the absolute must-start player of the week. I know, once again, this Jaguars defense has been pretty opportunistic. They're not, a bad defense, nothing to sneeze at, but they have struggled against the wide receiver position, bottom 10 in fantasy points allowed to opposing wide receivers. I know last week feels like a big stinker if you own Matthew Stafford, if you started him, if you own Davante Adams and you started him last week. They played the worst defense in the league, arguably, in the Baltimore Ravens, just 7.9 fantasy points last week for Davante Adams. But outside of week 6 and week 1 on the season, he has had 13.8 or more fantasy points in every single game on the season. And outside of one game this year, week 4, outside of that game, he's had 8 or more targets in every single game. He is due for a touchdown with just 3 touchdowns on the season. And like I said, leading the league in red zone targets. Week before the bye week, I know it's a London game. I don't always like these London matchups. Kind of feel similar to like a Thursday night football matchup. Not that this past week is a good example of that, but sometimes these games get a little bit weird. Once again, the weather might be bad here, but I think if you own Davante Adams, he is an absolute must-start wide receiver, and he could arguably have his biggest week of the season yet here in week 7. I'm headed straight to Underdog to take the over on Davante Adams to score a receiving touchdown here in week 7 of the season for all of the reasons we just went over. This feels about as safe as a line as you're going to get here in week 7. Don't forget, guys, all new users who sign up on Underdog using promo code THECATCH are getting a free NFL Pick Em to use towards week 7 NFL action. Take that free Pick Em. Take Adams to score a touchdown. If both of those lines hit, you'll automatically double your cash entry. And on top of that, Underdog has a brand new exclusive offer to anyone who signs up on Underdog using promo code THECATCH. Once you play through $5 on Underdog, you're going to receive $50 in bonus cash to use towards week 7 NFL action. And they're going to give you a 50% deposit match up to $1,000. So make sure you guys sign up on Underdog using promo code THECATCH. That link is down below if you want to take advantage of all of their exclusive Week 7 NFL offers. Jordan Mason of the Minnesota Vikings has logged at least 16 touches in 4 of 5 games so far on the season, and with Aaron Jones once again set to miss Week 7, there's no reason why he won't see a similar workload this week against the Eagles, who right now are ranking 26 in run-stop win rate at 28.6%. And the Eagles are also allowing the 7th most rushing yards per game. They just gave up a huge performance to Cam Scatterbo in week 6 and a very solid performance in week 5 to J.K. Dobbins at the running back position. I think a lot of people think of this Eagles defense. They get worried, like, what should I do here? This Eagles defense has just not been as elite as it was last year. And ultimately, once again, this is a bottom 10 unit in terms of fantasy points allowed to the running back position. Plus, we're getting Carson Wentz at the quarterback position here in week 7 of the season for the Vikings, so they're going to need to rely on the run game and establish the run game. And maybe with Wentz at quarterback, this game script gets out of hand potentially. I still think that the Eagles are a much better team right now than the Vikings, and maybe the Vikings do need to throw the football more here in week 7, but you just got to think this is a good spot for Jordan Mason, who has 10 or more fantasy points in 3 straight games and 3 touchdowns in that same stretch. So I'm not saying Jordan Mason's going to have like a crazy high ceiling or anything necessarily today, but I just don't want you guys to be worried worried about this Eagles defense. They have not been as elite as last year, especially in terms of stopping the run. They were consistently one of the best teams in terms of the fewest fantasy points allowed to running backs last year, and it has been essentially the exact opposite here in the 2025 season. So if you guys own Jordan Mason, it's a home game for the Vikings, and it's actually a very good matchup for him, so don't freak out. He is still a very solid start at the running back position here in Week 7. And speaking of solid starts at the running back position, I do want to talk about Quinshon Judkins, who was in position to bounce back from a disappointing 3.6 fantasy points he had in Week 6, but he has had 19 or more touches and scored at least 13 fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. And this week he gets the Miami Dolphins, who just gave up back-to-back performances of 22 or more fantasy points to Kamani Vidal and Rico Dowdle. And, no discredit to either of those running backs, but so far on the season, Quinshon Judkins has looked better than Kamani Vidal and arguably Rico Dowdle, who's really only started in 2 games. Maybe not Rico Dowdle to some of you guys, but still, Quinshon Judkins outside of last week has looked extremely efficient with 4.78 yards per carry in 3 out of 4 games with a ceiling of 6.1 yards per carry. He's been extremely efficient, a ceiling of 21.5 fantasy points against a good Lions defense on the road in Week 4. And I know last week was, not just disappointing in terms of Quinshon Judkins' overall performance, but also a little bit concerning because we did see some overall volume go back to Jerome Ford, at least in the passing game. And then we saw Dylan Gabriel at the quarterback position throw the football 52 times, and that's where the concern kind of comes in here is Jerome Ford going to be the back who's in terms of some of that receiving work out of the backfield? But I don't really get the feeling that here in Week 7 we're going to see a game script as similar to what we got in Week 6 for the Browns. I don't know if we're going to see as much passing volume because also this is another game this weekend that's supposed to have some really bad weather. I think that the Browns are going to just try and establish the run, stick to it. I think this could be one of Judkins' best fantasy performances on the season. But I do want you guys to note that while the Dolphins have been very, very poor against the running back position, they have only given up 2 rushing touchdowns on the season so far and 1 receiving touchdown. So they're giving up an immense amount of total yardage to running backs and a decent amount of receiving work, but they're not necessarily giving up a ton of touchdowns. So bear that in mind as well. But I still think here in Week 7, Quinshon Judkins has to be one of the safest starts at the running back position. You absolutely cannot bench him. All right, the New England Patriots are one of the heaviest pass teams in the league with a plus 3% pass rate over expectation. That ranks 4th highest in the league. Meanwhile, the Tennessee Titans have the 4th highest pass rate over expectation allowed, plus -1%. And I think that this is an absolute must-start area for Drake Maye. And although the Tennessee Titans secondary has been very poor against quarterbacks and wide receivers, this team still ranks top 5 against the quarterback position in terms of fantasy points allowed. It's not a great overall matchup because this front 7 is able to get pressure on the quarterback, and overall they just haven't allowed a ton of fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks on the season. But Drake Maye is coming off of his best fantasy performance on the season so far in Week 6 against the Saints, 27.2 fantasy points. His first game on the season where he threw 3 touchdowns. And ultimately, he's been extremely solid this year. He's the QB6 in fantasy right now. And you guys just got to remember, this is Mike Vrabel's first time facing the Tennessee Titans, right? This is going to be a game where they're going to put their foot on the gas and they're not going to take it off offensively. They're going to try and put up as many points as possible. And in terms of how the Patriots wide receiver room stacks up against this Tennessee Titans secondary, you got to feel good. I think we're going to see very solid days out of guys like Stephon Diggs, maybe Kayshon Boutte, Hunter Henry. I think we're going to see a lot of passing volume out of the Patriots today. Now, on paper, it is a very, very good matchup for the Patriots running backs as well, but who knows exactly what's going to happen there between Ramondre Stevenson and Trayvon Henderson, but definitely have them on your radar. And maybe they do get some volume here because the matchup's so good for them. But I really have a feeling that the Patriots are going to come out here and try and throw the football a lot, really try and showcase Drake Maye and continue to try and build upon the really solid season he's already having with 20 or more fantasy points in 4 out of the first 6 games, averaging 21 fantasy points per game. If you guys own Drake Maye, you got to feel feel good. And I really think that the Patriots are going to come out here in week 7 and try and put up as many offensive points as possible. So whatever you do, do not bench Drake Maye. All right, Tampa Bay Buccaneers running back Rachaad White is set to see another massive workload here in Week 7 with Bucky Irving set to miss Week 7, Emeka Egbuka questionable, Chris Godwin more than likely out, and Mike Evans going into this matchup questionable as well. Rachaad White has had 18 or more touches and scored 17 or more fantasy points in 2 straight games. Meanwhile, the Lions defensive front ranks 32nd in run stop win rate at 24%. And so this is a tough matchup, actually, when we look at fantasy points allowed. The Detroit Lions are ranking top 6 against opposing running backs in terms of fantasy points allowed. But like I just said, they haven't necessarily been the best overall run defense. You guys got to remember these rankings that I go by on a week-to-week basis that you guys see on the screen. That's including everything. That's including the receiving work, touchdowns scored, and all of that. And over the last few weeks, the Lions front 7 hasn't been as good at stopping the run ultimately when we look at the percentages here. So I really like this spot for Rachaad White. Now, it looks like Mike Evans has a very good chance to play. And technically speaking, Emeka Egbuka still has a shot to play. So we'll see exactly how that impacts things. I just think if they're out, I mean, obviously you're going to see more potential passing volume to Rachaad White, but he's had 14 or more touches on the ground in the last 2 games and has been pretty efficient, at least has found the end zone 3 times in the last 2 games. So this is still going to be a very good volume game on the ground for Rachaad White, but there is potential for more receiving work. He's only had at least 4 targets in the last 2 games, and 3 receptions last week, 4 receptions the previous week. So we're not really seeing a massive amount of volume in the passing game for Rachaad White when that is kind of what he's known for. But what we know is that the floor is very safe here. He's in position to absolutely dominate the touches in the backfield. And this is going to be one of the highest scoring games of the week. We already know that the Vegas lines here are implying that. And ultimately, these are 2 of the best teams in the NFL right now. The Lions have a ton of injuries in their secondary. The Buccaneers have a ton of injuries at the wide receiver position, so we'll see how things shake out. But you got to imagine Baker Mayfield, Jared Goff are both going to go out there and sling it. And I think the running backs on both teams, Rachaad White and Gibbs and Monty for the Lions, are all going to have very solid days. So if you guys own Rachaad White, he's still averaging 11.5 fantasy points per game on the season. We know he's a clear-cut RB1 here in Week 7. I think he's also an absolute must-start running back here in Week 7. There you guys have it. There are my 5 stats that you need to know before Week 7 of the fantasy season. Don't forget, guys, I'll answer as many fantasy football questions as I can in the comment section down below, so please drop me your fantasy questions. I'll answer as many as I can before kickoff tomorrow. And while you guys are down there, it does me a huge favor if you guys hit that subscribe button and that like button on the way out. And when the videos and playlists pop up on the screen, we have everything you could possibly need to dominate Week 7 of the season. So make sure you guys go check out all the content. We'll have all of our content coming out next week to help you guys dominate Week 8 of the fantasy season as well. So with that, I'll say good luck to each and every one of you guys here in Week 7 of the fantasy season. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.